Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Megan Jacobs and I'm the webinar coordinator here at Data Blueprint. We are so excited that you all found the time to join us for today's webinar on engineering solutions to data quality challenges. As always, a big thank you goes out to Shannon Kemp and Dataversity for hosting us. We'll get started in just a few moments after I introduce your speaker and also let you know about some housekeeping items. We are planning 1 hour for the presentation, followed by a 30-minute Q&A session. Due to the large number of participants, we have everyone on mute, but we will be collecting questions via the public chat. We will try to answer as many questions as time allows at the end, but feel free to submit them as they come up throughout the session. All right, to answer the top 2 of your most commonly asked questions, yes, you will receive an email with links to download today's materials and any other information you request during the session within the next 2 business days. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook. We have set up the hashtag DataEd on Twitter, so if you're logged on, feel free to use it in your tweets and submit your questions and comments that way. We'll keep an eye out on that feed, and we'll include answers to these questions in the Q&A towards the end as well. We also wanted to let you know about a brand new LinkedIn group called Data Management and Business Intelligence. It is a great place to keep up with industry news, connect with other data management professionals, and gain access to educational resources. Okay, and now let me introduce you to our speaker. Dr. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized thought leader in the data management field. Many of you already know him and have seen him at conferences nationally and worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions. He is the founding director of Data Blueprint as well. Peter has written 7 books and dozens of articles. He has experience with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and is consistently named as one of the top 10 data management experts in the world. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with organizations as diverse as the U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, and the Commonwealth of Virginia and Walmart. He is highly desired at conferences and workshops and always traveling to numerous speaking engagements and projects. Just recently, he was visiting a DAMA chapter in Minnesota. Peter, where are you today?
I'm on my way to Ohio, Megan, and hopefully everybody can still see the screen there. I had a little crash right before we got started, but thanks very much, Shannon and Megan, and welcome everybody. Today's topic is data quality engineering, as always brought to you by Data Blueprint and the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Business on this. Our topics today, as always, I start out with an introduction on data management so that you have some context for the rest of the material that follows. And then we're going to look at data quality definitions and an overview, what a data quality management cycle looks like. We'll talk about data quality awareness and requirements and go through some very specific dimensions, which is probably an area that many of you have not been exposed to at this point. The dimensions are specifically developed to help you understand where we can achieve the most leverage in our data quality efforts. Then we'll move into some data quality classes of tools and finish up with some guiding principles. As always, we give you a bunch of references on this and finish up before we go into the Q&A. So let's get started with the data management introduction. Up until a couple of years ago, most people wouldn't have known what you meant when you said data management, but now we can tell you for sure that it is a set of disciplines that are interlocking, and we represent it with this wheel here that we show. You can see they are organized around the topic of data governance, which is where we started out in January, and now we are at 10th of these, which is now moving into data quality management right up there at 11 o'clock, moving on back towards midnight there. Again, our data wheel there is also supplemented, realizing that this is a socio-technical discipline and that we cannot simply rely on technology to do this, that we need to include the organizational culture, activities, practices, roles, and responsibilities into that process. I'm always gratified when I go out to the DAMA chapters. As Megan mentioned, I was out in Minneapolis weeks ago, and a number of people came up to me and said, hey, I got my CDMP. So we are approaching 1,000 CDMP people worldwide, certificate holders. It's not quite as impressive as Mark Zuckerberg having 1 billion Facebook users, but I can guarantee you that none of my CDMP holders here are fake. The process is, of course, that we'd like to get more and more of you certified in this fashion, because this gives us the ability then to tell employers that this certification is valuable. The CDMP itself is a collaboration between DAMA International and the ICCP. It gives you membership in this distinct group of 1,000 people worldwide who have demonstrated their proficiency in these areas. It's a series of 3 specific exams, and I've given you a link there on the website for you to go and find more information. But if you do see me out in Ohio or wherever we meet on our travels and you did get your CDMP by studying through this particular series of courses, let me know what we can do to make this more valuable to you, and more importantly, to make you all more valuable to your respective employers, because that's really what it's all about. Now, from a data management perspective here, we typically show this chart, and on the East Coast here, it's after lunch. It's a very confusing chart. It's got a lot of different things in it that are all complex, and I'll give you the easier version of it now, which is that there are really 5 major components to data management. The first one is called data program coordination, and the only input to that box, if you're looking at that more detailed version of it, is that we're all singing off the same sheet of paper. Many organizations have many different people that are working in data management. Their efforts are best served, the leverage that the organizations achieve is greatest when they're all singing off the same piece of paper, moving towards the same strategic objective, being coherent in their efforts to manage the organization's data. The second data management function then is to share data across organizational boundaries or within parts of the organization. You can think of it as program to program, that's technical program as in program code or software to software. You can also think about it as part of the organization to another part. Maybe the marketing department needs to share information with the manufacturing department. And then also between our organization and our respective business partners. Third function is data stewardship, which is to assign responsibilities for the data. If we don't make it personal, if we don't make somebody personally responsible for some parts of the data, data is everybody's responsibility, which means nothing really gets done. And that's sort of the way it's been for the past couple of decades in this area. Hence the big focus on data governance these days. Data development is our fourth function. This is the ability to engineer data delivery systems. In the past, this has meant build new databases. Now we understand it includes things like XML, virtualization, and other types of topics, portals and things that are many, many more options than we used to have in the past. And quite frankly, our educational systems have not caught up with these developments. So the only place you can find about them is these types of educational opportunities offered through Dataversity. Finally, our fifth option is the data support operations. This is the business continuity function, the ability to maintain data availability, and also to tune the various systems that we have in place to make these things run. So that's what that map means. It's a big, complicated map. I've given you the management overview there. And now let's move on into what we're talking about from data quality engineering here. And again, you'll see that this map here will come back to us in just a little bit, but this is the one-page summary of the information that we're going to cover, and our little data management model goes right in the middle there. So we just drop it right in, and it works out very, very nicely. So moving on in our outline then, again, we have the definitions and overview. What do we mean by data management, quality management here? Well, what we have is a formal definition, planning, implementation, and control activities that apply quality management techniques to measure, assess, improve, and ensure the fitness of data for use. That fitness for use is going to come back to us several different times. This means that we're going to be having specific roles and responsibilities that are concerned with the maintenance, dissemination, and disposition of data. These are now becoming accepted definitions for it, so we don't actually have to argue over these anymore. People are understanding the importance of data, the various data deluge, or whether we're talking about big data or any of the other current silver bullets that are going on in the world right now. The quality of that data is a crucial component, and we also understand that this relates to organizational change management. We know that very well, so there's no need to reinvent the wheel there. We can use the existing organizational change management processes. And finally, it's a continuous improvement process. So we're going to be looking at specific levels to meet business needs and then ensuring that the data meets those levels. You'd be amazed at how many organizations we go into where they simply don't have any agreement over what the quality should be of the data that they're supplying back and forth. And that can lead to some disastrous consequences, a couple of which I'll highlight here as we go through the presentation. Finally, let's get to a definition of data quality. It's synonymous with information quality because if you have poor data quality, you can't have accurate information. And if you don't have accurate information, you will have poor business performance. Our overview of concepts and activities here is that we've got a data management quality approach. We want to promote awareness. We want to talk about specific requirements, particularly as we are developing new or revised or re-engineered systems. We want to talk about data quality up front there. Again, things that you can't engineer in after the fact include quality, architecture, and security, and we've already hit the other two. This is our third one of that particular trilogy. It includes the need to profile and understand and assess the various components of data quality, and I think I've got a typo on that particular slide, so I'll try to remember to fix that one. It's not AS's data quality. Define data quality metrics, so things that we're going to use to understand. Look at the specific business rules that surround data quality that go in there. To test and validate the data quality requirements that we have, to set and evaluate the service levels, to monitor and measure these quality levels, to manage the issues when they do come up, and to cleanse and correct them when we do encounter the problems that are there. And then at a higher level, designing and implementing data quality management procedures and then monitoring the implementation of those procedures. Now, that's a lot of things to go into here. Let me just sort of back off from this and use an analogy that our friend Tom Redmond uses a lot. If you think about data quality as a lake and your data comprising the water that is in that lake, we can certainly go in and clean the quality of the lake, and there's absolutely some value to doing that, but hopefully you all agree as well that it's more important to find the sources of the pollution to prevent future water that goes into the lake from being polluted by future non-quality streams that go into this. If we don't have that in place, then it's terrific work, but it becomes a lot of make work, and we don't want organizations to spend extra money and resources doing this, especially in times that are tight at the moment as we go through this. These expectations, again, have to make sure that we understand what data quality is in the requirements processes, in the various inspections that we need to do, in the various measurements and monitoring procedures that we set up. And the frameworks that we put in place to do this are a way in which we can record that expectation in terms of business rules and a way to measure that quality within a particular dimension. And we'll come to the dimensions in about 30 minutes on this particular talk. And then figure out what is an acceptability threshold when we look at that. So let's move now into the data quality management cycle. It's a variation on the Plan, Do, Act, Check, Act theme that many of you are familiar with. Again, what happens here is that we start out the process by taking a look at the overall cycle and just understanding that it is a cycle. It's the first thing to make sure that management understands. A lot of folks think that you go clean up the data and it will stay clean after that. It does not. In fact, just a tip to most of you, a typical process that organizations have gone through many, many times is that they will say, okay, we're going to open up the system and we'd like everybody to go through and update their own addresses, thinking that will be the best way to ensure the quality. And in study after study, we have observed that the quality of the data goes down when we take what seems to be a fairly rational step by asking everybody to validate their own data. So we know that we can't approach this in a typical fashion and that it will be a continuous cycle that goes through. Again, from a perspective here, we're going to plan an aspect of data quality that we need to change. It's not the entire plan, it's the most important piece, which implies that out of your data governance group, somebody should be determining priorities for work that is going on, and that a dedicated group of data quality specialists is then dispatched to go off and attack this particular quality program. Again, they're going to plan that particular process. They're going to deploy some sort of processes and assets for measuring and improving the quality of the data. You'll see the word profiling start to come up here. It's very difficult to actually know what's going on with your data without looking at it. So again, profiling is the idea that we're going to get in and get a sense for what's actually happening in the data. A couple of quick examples in that area might be useful for you. If it's important for your business strategy to know when a person's birthday is, let's pretend you're a retailer and you want to celebrate their birthday by giving them, a particular incentive coupon on their birthday. I'll challenge your organizations to go in and find out what day of the month your typical person is born on. Now, most of the time you would expect to see that as an even line distributed across the days of the month, but you'd be amazed at how many organizations we go into and find out that most of their customers were born on the first day of the month, according to the data. Well, if you're telling people that you're going to be celebrating their birthday and you get the birthday wrong, it's not the best way to go about the process of looking at it. So again, the profiling processes, knowing factual information about what's actually going on there, which can help you to prevent from deploying embarrassing activities and things that don't end up working out the way it should. Then once you've deployed these changes into your business rules and things, you need to monitor them and see if the process that you put in place is working. Again, we've had many instances here where people say, oh, I fixed that, but if they don't catch the source of the pollution, they won't know that it's now repolluted again, and you hate it when you have to fix things twice, right? And again, acting back around the circle, so it's a plan, do, check, act type of cycle that walks our way through this. Again, the important part to emphasize here is that this is a cyclical activity, so that nobody expects you to be done at any one particular point in time, but that you should be able to demonstrate that things are getting better. I hope that's clear. Again, we'll take some questions if we have any around that as we go further on that. So let's talk about how to promote and understand the awareness in here. It means we do need to sort of talk about things in a semi-public way within our organization, but not something I would advise you to advertise externally to your organization. And we've actually got a polling question we're going to ask you in just a minute on this, but the key here is to make sure that people understand that the data that they're using may not be the right type of data. They may not be aware of the types of things that are going on here. One of my favorite examples is an example that Larry English tells many times. The hospital in Tennessee that decided they were going to put in, based on the data, a knee surgery wing. And the physicians, after the announcement was made, looked around at each other and said, knee surgery? Are you doing a lot of knee surgery? No, I'm really not doing a lot of knee surgery. And it turned out that what had happened was that the default hospital admission code was knee surgery, and people were simply hitting enter and blasting past that field without actually putting in something. So a simple change in the procedure of not allowing it to default to any code at all would have prevented that particular organization. The right people in the organization thought they were really aware of this, but they weren't aware that they had poor quality data in that process. So we may need to help them understand what the relative material impact of these data quality issues are. And for those of you that are in Ohio, I'm going to be talking about this in quite a bit of detail on Thursday afternoon as we work through some of this material in more detail. But we do need to put some dollar values on it. Because if we can't put a dollar value on it, then people might say, well, so what? And on the other hand, if I say, well, at least we prevented you from investing $30 million in a wing of a hospital to do a bunch of surgeries that management thought it had a need for but didn't in fact exist, that's something that's pretty tangible in terms of how that works. And so that moves us to our first polling question that we have here. Which of these is not a step to promote data quality awareness? The first answer, A, there is training on the core concepts of data quality. B, establishing a data governance quality framework. Or 3, creating an architecture map in there. And we'll give you just a minute to give you some answers. We use these answers to sort of track how well people are aware of these issues over time and whether the awareness is becoming more broad spread or not. So Megan, are you getting some responses there?
Oh, actually, it's me, and we've got a lot of people answering. Give me just a second. People are still posting their answers.
Now, this is interesting. On this version of WebEx, I can't see the answers, so you'll have to tell me what people are saying there, Shannon.
Yeah, so the majority right now are saying C, and let me close the poll here in just 5 seconds. Alrighty, the poll is closing, and let me display the results to everyone.
So you said most people were choosing C, and that, of course, is the right answer on that. It's not that data architecture can't have an impact on quality, but in terms of creating awareness, you really do put some training in place. You really do want to establish a framework, particularly from a governance perspective, so that people understand data quality. Shannon, thanks for the help with the poll there on that. Let's see. There we go. All right. So as we do this awareness, what types of steps should we take? And again, even if it's just a little webinar like this, by the way, these webinars are recorded, and you guys can play them back for your colleagues on that, but it's very easy for you to develop things, and it's probably more useful for you to develop things that are relevant to your organization. So take a little bit of time, find an organization-wide meeting or an IT-wide meeting, or even visit a couple department meetings, and talk to them about what data quality concepts mean, what these core concepts are about. Again, establish this framework for data quality. And finally, even if you don't have a formal board, put a bunch of people together who may not have formal authority, but at least kind of get together. I can't tell you how many organizations where I'll go into and they say, well, we'd really like you to help us develop a DAMA chapter right here in the organization. It's like, oh, it's a great idea, but what are you trying to do? And I said, well, we just need a group that can help focus on this. And I'll be looking, and there'll be 12 people looking back at me and say, I'll say, you've already got the group. Go ahead and take the authority. Work into that area. Somebody eventually may tell you to stop, and then you can say, oh, well, if we're not going to do it, then who does get to do it? Again, what you want to look at are data in context for fitness of use. So while birth date may be critically important for some organizations, it may be less important for other organizations. You may only need to understand whether your customer base is aging at a relative rate rather than actually knowing what the individual birth dates are. The real challenge for all of this is that the requirements are hidden within business policies. So we have a translation function that has had to occur by people going over to the business and asking them questions about this. We speak here about detailed reviews, but it can be informal as well. The idea is just to find out, with the various business policies that are being driven by strategy, what are the key data pieces that are there, and how do these data assertions impact the business? Again, if I'm, as a business, trying to get to know my customers and try to prove to my customers that I know them, getting their birth date wrong is probably not the area to really focus on. Again, try to categorize these areas, and you'll see they fall into a bunch of different dimensions here, 4 different dimensions. We'll get into that in just a minute. But it is important to categorize them so you're not trying to boil the ocean, but to deal with different types of categories that you're working at. Look at the business rules that occur relative to that, and then, again, say, well, how are we going to know if we're getting better at this? So come up with procedures that allow us to move in these areas. Now, these next couple of slides, a couple of these slides are just simply big pieces of reference data for you guys, because most of this stuff does not exist in the world out here. So here are some data quality dimensions in here, and you can see there's accuracy, completeness. We won't go through each of these things. They're not all going to be important to all organizations, but it's a great checklist to take a look at and see where things are. Now, most data quality initiatives start out either top-down or bottom-up. The bottom-up is you've got some people who are looking at things, and eventually they start looking at more things and keeping track of those things over time, and they've put together a set of metadata that describes some of the characteristics of their data. And they're sort of bubbling up these issues and saying, you know, when we close a loan, we have about 1 in 3 that needs to be redone because we don't get good quality data, and when we have to redo it, it means we have to inconvenience the customer by rescheduling time in busy people's calendars, blah, 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 you know, that sort of a thing. It's an example of bottom-up. And you're going to management and saying, you know, if we did this better, it would cost us less and we'd achieve better value for the customers. Top-down is when management kind of hears one of these things, and they go, oh, yeah, I guess we better look at that. You know, it turns out that the last 4 air conditioning units we've installed have been incorrect because we didn't have the right weight of the roof, or we didn't have the right delivery vehicle, so we're going to try and move these things from a top-down. It doesn't really matter which way it starts. If it's not coming top-down in your organization, start it bottom-up, but if you've got it coming in or a receptive audience, and it's very likely that you can combine the two approaches. I think one of the other things that we've seen too is that the chief financial officer is very likely to be more concerned about this than he or she has been in the past. So you might want to go to your financial officer and say, let's talk about putting some metrics in place. And if we were able to examine a couple of these, again, don't boil the ocean. Remember, emphasize to them that it's an iterative process, and that for one example, we're going to go through and look at some critical impacts and say it's terrible when we show up to deliver an air conditioning unit and we can't actually install it for the customer. Just thinking back to one of the exercises that we've gone on here. So then you need to determine what are the dependent data elements that are associated with that business process, and these units have a weight, and the weight isn't properly calculated, and so we if we put this unit on that roof, the roof would collapse, so we don't want to do that. Again, I'm giving you a very practical business-focused example. It's not specifically an IT one, but that's the language you have to speak in. That's where people will understand this. Again, list some associated requirements that go along with it. And then, again, I keep referencing these data dimensions that we're just about to dive into, because when you categorize them according to the dimensions in the business rules, you can talk about which types of processes to apply. Then you want to go back and look at measuring the conformance and then specifying a specific acceptability threshold in this. We talk about data profiling tools as if they are a separate category of tools, and they are. But you do not need to have these specialized tools to do the data analysis. You can find somebody in your organization with a spreadsheet or a good set of command of SQL who can do the same kinds of activities to look for these anomalies. What we're really looking at is go out and grab some data and take a look at it and see what it is. Again, we'll go back to the birthday example. Let's just do a profile of what birthday applies on what day of the month. And again, if they all occur on the first day of the month, it's a pretty good indication you don't have good quality tools there. You use these same tools for going in and validating the rules that you put in place, which is one, we're not going to let a new customer master record exist until we first validated the birth date. Again, that could be a business rule that you might want to put in place in order to do this. This gives you the ability then during this assessment phase to combine this, and especially if you're still in requirements, you can build into the requirements process the tools and tests that you need to have in order to do this. This gives you the ability to define these service level agreements that says these data elements are covered, these business impacts are associated with these data flaws, so that the next time there is a business impact, they know which data to go and look at, and again, which quality dimensions are associated with each element that are there. It gives us a set of expectations for them that will start small, but over time it will grow and become more useful, and eventually you'll realize that you have a catalog that you've put together that gives you a lot more specific data information than you would have necessarily if you were doing and treating each one of these in a reactive mode. The goal is, of course, to shift yourselves from reactive to proactive in this fashion here. Again, controlling and measuring for these things, we can grab them as they're coming through and looking at everything. We're hearing a lot about big data, and that's going to be a lot more focused on in-stream types of measurements. But we may want to also wait until they get set up someplace and do them in a batch type of activities through some sampling or statistical collection methods. I'll tell you the worst place to do it, though, is to put it in the data warehouse, the brand new data warehouse, and then try to measure the data quality there. Going to be very problematic as you do that. The other part of this is important is what level of granularity are you going for. There's the data element value, there's the instance or record level, and then there's the entire data set level. And again, you may have different pieces that apply to each parts of the program where it's important to look at it all the way up and down. I like this particular icon I put up here on the board here because it's actually a pretty good product, but it cleanses and integrates, right? And there is some sense here that as you're doing integration work, you ought to be doing cleansing work at the same time and vice versa. These activities are entirely complementary. In fact, we usually see that they occur in 3 steps, not just in 2 simultaneously. So once we have these things in place, we can then develop a incident reporting system that'll provide these capabilities on an ongoing basis. And you can log the evaluation, which means you can now start to track these things over time. It allows you then to implement, to the degree possible, automated correction, but also potentially manually directed correction, and finally somebody actually getting in and tweaking the data in there. Let's look at a couple of examples here. If we're looking at the data element level for completeness and for structural consistency and reasonableness, we may want to apply some specific edit checks in the application where the data is created. We may want to look at the same checks applying when we move the data from one system to another system, or when we're moving the data between our business partners and ourselves as we move around. We may also want to develop special applications that do just checking for this. So when the systems are not as heavily used, perhaps at night, we could go through and do some sort of quality analysis in order to do this as well. Again, I've put these up here for each of them. You can take that as, again, some more reference material, but it's important to not just attack it as a data quality issue, but to say, what level of granularity are we doing it? How does this match up with our business goals and objectives? And how can we make staff aware that these issues shouldn't just be taken care of and then forgotten about, but in fact captured so that we know how many they're occurring, how often they're occurring, and perhaps get to a more better understanding of why they're occurring and what we can do about them in order to correct them. Again, these data quality management procedures include inspection and monitoring, diagnosis and evaluation of the various alternatives. We could go in and have a bunch of people fix it. We could develop a system that may take longer but be more effective in the long run. We have to evaluate the two alternatives that are there. We need to resolve the issues that are coming up, and again, we need to report on a regular basis. Because if we don't have accountability and we have data issues that are not assigned to various individuals, then it'll be very, very difficult to come back and say, how is it going and how are we making progress throughout the process here. Okay, again, that's our sort of awareness. Let's get into the dimensions. I've talked about them a couple of different times here. Very important concept on this. Here's an example of somebody looking at the process and saying, well, we did 10 interviews with different groups, and as we did 10 of these things, we found a series of patterns where they were talking about the various problems that people have had in their organizations. Then we can go back and say, all right, well, these patterns indicate that data, going from X to Y is where most of the problems seem to occur, and we should subsequently put our efforts into it. Again, these stories may be very, very useful. I actually recommend that organizations, and we are in October here, hold something around Halloween that I call the Data Horror Stories session. Go ahead and have people dress up in costumes and things like that, but then behind closed doors, have people bring their worst quality stories in and capture these stories. Again, this is not for publication, but for raising internal awareness. And then you can summarize these stories into just a series of PowerPoints or maybe even a series of vignettes that you put on your internally facing website and allow people to start to see the kinds of things that are happening there. But don't just put up the problems and then how they address them with the solution in order to do this. Now, when you're trying to address these data quality solutions, most people just think of action. And I really want to stress that there are two types of activities here, and that most organizations only practice one of them, which is the practice-oriented activities. These are activities that focus on the capture and manipulation of the data. And while those are absolutely important, as you'll see in a bit, you will find that the organizations are neglecting a lot of leverage on here. When they're neglecting this leverage, they're really missing out on a better way of going in and addressing their data quality challenges here. So let me go into a little bit more detail here. Again, practice-oriented causes when you sort of open it up and say enter a birth date or something like this, and you don't go back and validate it. You'll notice that online stores like Amazon and Apple and things will do a validation of your shipping address before they let you pay for the goods. because they've made a promise to you as to when they're going to deliver it. They need to make sure they can keep their progress done. These include such technical things such as edit masking or cyclical redundancy checking, that's what CRC is, of transmitted data and things like that. And you'll notice on the top there that those practice-oriented pieces really address the data quality value and the representation that's there. In addition to that, however, there's another whole class of these, and this is really an architecture-focused type of activities where they are structure-related. What we're trying to do is to make sure that the data is stored and arranged in the area that best complements the organizational strategy. You've probably all heard, the data's in the system, but we can't get to it. Or we've got the correct data value that we put out, but we asked the wrong question. Or we can't provide any answer at all because people don't know how to go about and achieve it in there. The challenge is that developers have tended to focus within system boundaries instead of across system boundaries. And so that's a big challenge for most organizations. So the practice-oriented activities allow the wrong type of data or data that doesn't work to be collected in these. Again, these are typically addressed in a bottom-up fashion rather than a top-down, and are addressed by rigorous data practices around there. So again, the quality of the data values and the quality of the data representation. The structure-oriented, though, are things that really can't be built into the system after the system is built. So we have to take some sort of compensating action for them. These structure-oriented activities speak to the quality of the data models and the data architectures that are in here. Again, we are going to be unable to make major changes in there, but at least we can know and understand what the consequences of having those challenges are. So when we look at this across the spectrum here, you'll see, again, data value and data representation are two of the dimensions, and they are practice-oriented, and data modeling and data architecture are the other two. They are structurally oriented. And when you look at them here, you'll see that on the left-hand side of this diagram, we've got data quality that is presented to the user, so that's where people tend to think about it. But that the architecture is a thing that is closer to the architect. And that, of course, would make sense, but it's far away from the user, so the users, and more importantly, the business people, tend not to see it or understand its importance. Now, here's a better view of that same diagram, and you'll notice that the relationship between these is that one, working from right to left, one data architecture can spawn multiple data models, and each data model can spawn multiple data values, and each data value can spawn multiple data representations. I also have included the complete set of attributes that are in there for each of these. So if you find out that there's a detail issue on a data representation quality, then you know where to focus your efforts and put it into that. And of course, that being closer to the user, that tends to be what most people focus on. However, you'll notice that at the left-hand side of the diagram, if you're working there, you have a lot less leverage. And if you can get management to allow you to focus in on the structural issues, on the re-architecting of data that needs to be re-architected in there, that you have a lot more leverage. The analogy that I like to use is that if you're at the data representation level, it's kind of like sitting at the bottom of a waterfall and looking up and saying there's poor quality water coming out of that waterfall. Yes, you can affect it to some degree, but it's a whole lot more effective if you can get upstream, find out what the source of that water pollution is, and then address it there. And similarly, we'd like for you all to be able to address it at the model quality level and the architecture quality level, because that is what really gives you the power of these data quality initiatives that are going in here. Again, for your own reference, we've given you each of these values here. So there are the 10 for data quality value. There are 12 of them for data quality representation. There's a 12 more that we've put in place for data model quality, and 9 that go in for data architecture quality. This gives you now the ability to look at your data quality problems and figure out where things should go and what types of problems that you get. And you guys are in a minority now, but you at least are aware of these issues, whereas the vast majority of guidance out there does not speak to these. And if you have a data quality initiative that's going on, I challenge you to go in and see if they're in fact addressing these things at the left-hand side of that diagram or the right-hand side where they have the most leverage. Now, not all problems can be fixed on the right-hand side, but certainly a lot more of them can be fixed if now that people are aware of it than they would be able to otherwise. Okay, moving right along here. This picture is probably one of the more important ones in the entire presentation. This is a new and expanded data lifecycle quality model that incorporates metadata. In the past, our data lifecycles have only incorporated data usage, and again, I'm speaking to the choir here, you can't create data if you haven't first created metadata. So if we don't address the metadata components of it, we are simply going to be unable to affect the structural aspects of data quality, which again is a big, big challenge if you're working in this area. You'll notice that at the center of the diagram we have metadata storage and representations in there. It's not that you have to have a metadata repository, although we'd love for you to be able to use that, but that you need to have something that acts like a metadata repository. We've seen a lot of organizations work with Access databases and Excel spreadsheets in this capacity, as long as they're used as a shared resource and people can gain use of them. In fact, if organizations approach us, a lot of times they'll say, well, we understand we need to get a metadata repository. We will actually discourage them from going in and directly buying a big metadata repository solution. Instead, we'll say, build one of your own, play with it for a little bit, and use it for a year, and then you'll be in a good position to have an intelligent conversation with the rest of the vendors out there. But starting in there, it's such a big step function, it's very problematic for organizations. Now you can see the circle here goes counterclockwise, and again the steps are, if you're doing new system development, you need to build data quality in at the time you create your metadata, at the time you structure your metadata, before you create your data, before you start to utilize your data, before you start to manipulate your data. And that if you have existing systems, you start at the bottom right-hand corner there, which is, again, the starting point for existing systems where we are assessing the data, refining it, and then deciding whether or not we need to restructure the metadata, as in a structural aspect of the problem, or whether we simply want to work at the practice here, where we're dealing with the data values in particular. Again, I hope that's clear. It's a very, very fundamentally different shift in thinking about data quality, and I don't think you'll find that I certainly think you won't find it in most textbooks, and certainly not in most organizations that are thinking about the process here. So, as always with these webinars, we are working our way through all of these things, and this is our little checklist that we've put together and what we've covered so far this year. So we're going to blast through in the last 15 minutes here what are the goals and principles of data quality management, the activities, the primary deliverables, the roles and responsibilities, some parts of the technology. Again, I'll give you classes of data quality tools that are out there, some very specific practices and techniques, and some organizational culture on that. So start off with the goals and principles. Again, our goal here is to improve the quality of the data, but not just say we're improving it, to measurably demonstrate that we're doing it. And not just to pick some data, but to define, to do this in response to some specific business expectations. So we can't do this strictly as an IT initiative. It's got to be done in conjunction with one or more aspects of the business. This gives us the ability to define requirements and specifications for putting data quality control into the systems development lifecycle. And it turns out that a lot of these are external to the system development lifecycle. So one of the things I love to do with organizations is that if they're building a data warehouse or a master data management solution, or moving their data to the cloud, or picture any of these types of initiatives that they're doing, I'll say, well, up front in your requirements, you should have some specific requirements for data quality. Just to take the cloud, for example, if people are moving to the cloud, and there's nothing wrong with the cloud, but it's a neutral piece of technology. It is not a positive or a negative piece of it. Would you agree that the data that's in the cloud ought to be at least as good as the data outside of the cloud. So it shouldn't be worse inside the cloud than it is outside the cloud. So I'll contend that it should really be better. So one of the things that we should be doing as we're moving things into cloud computing is specifying what the quality of the data is outside the cloud and then proving that the data inside the cloud is of higher quality. By the way, two other attributes that go along with cloud: it should be also less in volume, about 1/5 the size of data outside the cloud. That's a huge, huge difference there. And also it should be more shareable. We can get into those pieces in another. Actually, that's the next one coming up, I think, is technology on this. And again, last part of this, of course, is to refine measurable ways of reporting this on a regular basis so that people do understand here. So our activities from a data quality group, if you're just getting it started, develop and promote the awareness of it. It's not a bad thing to have a once a month little brown bag lunch and just talk about issues that come up. Like I said, you can do your horror stories for Halloween now that we're in October, but find out what works for your organization. Establish and evaluate the various service level agreements that you're putting in place. Look at your process for testing and validating the data quality requirements. If you have requirements that are going into your systems, how are you testing them? How are you validating them? What are you doing to profile, process, analyze data quality? What are you doing to continuously measure this? What are you looking at in terms of formally maintaining business rules that are going around it? What metrics are you putting in place that allow you to determine what decisions can be made on this? What data quality issues are you trying to address? What have you gotten good at? What is your practice allowing you to get better at? What are the number of data quality defects or the types of data quality defects that you're looking at? Again, all of these things are important to take a look at because what we're trying to get to is improved quality of data. Now, you can't just say it's better. You do have to demonstrate it. There's one of, I think, Deming's quotes was, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." Again, we want you to bring data about your data quality to this. We also want you then to incorporate this process into your operations, and so that people are looking at things. Again, those of you that remember a really terrific book from the old days called The Goal, one of the things they concentrated on quite a lot there was quality analysis that went in there, and they built it into the way the company worked. This allows you then to establish various profiles for data. You might decide that a data quality profile for specific master data items might be important. Again, if these are going to be the master list of things that we're going to keep track of, that we want to have a certain level of quality. In fact, some organizations go as far as implementing a practice we call data quality branding, which when people bring data into their organizations, meetings and things like that, one of the things that many of your organizations can say is that at the moment, all of your data is of unknown quality. That's a pretty bad statement. So how do we counteract that? We can say, well, here's some data, and we may draw a line around it. We may put it behind a portal. We may put it in a certain data warehouse. We may do just different ways of accessing it. But that this data that's in this piece within the circle that we've drawn is of known quality. It may not be of perfect quality, but I'd certainly rather use data of known quality than data of unknown quality. Again, it just should give some of your managers the willies to really we're using data of unknown quality. That's not very good, is it? You say yes, of course, it's not very good. Again, here, service level agreements that we're going to put in place. You're going to have a number of different groups here. We're getting ready for our second polling question on this one. But you're going to have different suppliers, and we just want you to use this as a checklist. Where are you getting this? Those of you that are subject to federal and state regulation, the regulators are going to be an important source of information for this. You're going to categorize these suppliers. You're going to categorize the participants. You're going to categorize the consumers. And not all are going to apply to each project, but it's going to allow you to winnow down the field and take a look at things and say, where are we looking at overall in these areas? Because we need to get the right people to the table so we can start to address these. And this does take us to our second polling question here. Question is, which is a step to promote data quality awareness? First answer is A, training on the core concepts. B, establishing a data governance framework for quality. Or 3, creating an architecture map. That looks like the same question we had before, isn't it? have a data quality error in our little one.
It does. I'm not sure what's going on, but you can still answer A, B, or C.
Yeah. but the answer this time is we'll have to wait and see what they guess. Maybe it's not a trick. Maybe it's just a trick to Peter. She's looking at it and saying, did she put that one in there to catch me on that one?
I'm sorry about that. That's my fault. And Peter, for the slides that are heavy in graphics, there seems to be a delay in the transition. So if you can just add a couple seconds there. We've got everybody answering A, B, or C. And the poll is closing. Let me show the results.
You'll have to tell me what they are since I can't see them.
Yeah, let me just display them really quick. Now you should be able to see. It looks like 38% said A.
Is the answer A? So was the other two evenly split, or were they distinct?
Oh, we have so a few more people said B, and the fewest, 9% said C.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Double check on that one there. All right, let's talk about technology here. Now, what we're talking about are not specific tools, but specific classes of tools. So we're going to move into these data quality tools. Pass that slide there. We go. And let's look at the types of things that are there. We're looking really at 4 types of activities. Analysis, what's going on. Cleansing, okay, so we want to get things clean. Enhancement, which means we're now trying to enrich the existing data. This is, again, adding additional structure components that are there. And finally, a monitoring component as well that allows us to go forward and figure out, how are we doing? And these, of course, correspond to the Plan, Do, Check, Act we looked at earlier on here. Again, the classes of tools are these data profiling tools, some parsing, some transformation, some identity resolution, which are becoming very, very powerful, enhancement tools, and then regular old reporting tools. Let's go to the first category here, profiling. Again, you'll hear this as a big, exciting piece. Now, I will take credit for some of this. When I was with the Department of Defense in the early 1990s, we funded some research that went off and created these first class of data profiling tools. They are very powerful, very good, and they are rentable. So even if you can't afford to buy one, most of the vendors out there will now rent you the services of these tools so that you can try it out for a month or two and see if you can make a business case. Now, business case should be pretty straightforward. Let's pretend that the tool costs you $1,000 to rent, and it costs you maybe, let's pretend it's $50,000 worth of labor to use the tool. So there's a total sunk cost of $50,000, $51,000, and you're able to return to the organization several $1 million in benefits just on that 1 month process. It's not hard at all to see that investing more in that tool and getting better at it should produce better results for the organization as a whole. Again, the idea here is to try and look at these tools. I do another whole class. It's an advanced topic on how to do these profiling activities. I've written a couple books on the subject, as well as other people have done one. In particular, you'll see at the end, Danette McGilvery's got a terrific book that goes into this. These profiling tools give you the analysis here. And again, let's just see if I can visualize this. It goes down every row. So we look at all the birth dates. Then we go across every row. So we're looking at how often does birth date change when other parts of the record changes. Again, that's a structure-oriented concept. And then we go across data sets with them. Oh, this pile of data over here looks like the same pile of data over here. Is a customer ID the same thing as an employee ID? Well, again, depending on the business, it may or may not do it. But these profiling tools allow you to quickly and easily go in and figure out exactly what's going on with your data based on some factual information. Second class of tools are these parsing tools and these standardization tools. And you'll see, again, particularly when you're dealing with Amazon and things. They want to standardize this. Another office that does this, by the way, is the post office. When you're sending letters around there, they will try to bring all things into a standard format so that everybody's using street as a particular piece. Oh, another typo on this slide. Gosh, this is funny. It's the third time we've given it, and I hadn't caught that typo before. Again, these standardization tools particularly have to do with addresses and things, and allow people to come up with the same types of things so that delivery codes can be standardized and everybody can be more efficient. What we're trying to do is automate as much as possible and eliminate manual intervention into these things. Third class of tools are the data transformation tools. These are things that we put in something on one side and it comes out the other side. Again, different components, a lot of XML transformations use these types of tools here, so that if we put in an address in the first place, we might get out the person's first, middle, and last name, just one example of that. Speaking of names, identity resolution and matching are a phenomenal set of tools. I don't know about you all, but many times when you go through a credit exercise or a validation exercise, I have one bank that I use that asks me and says, so what city was your high school in? And I've never given the bank that information, but they have managed to figure it out because they know who I am in the larger scheme of things. So identity resolution can be very important, very useful for different organizations. Enhancement tools here, again, trying to get a better set of things. So if I have just a for example, at the university here we use something called a V number, which is our unique identifier for students, but when we use the V number we can actually access the rest of the record. So again, like a master data type concept here. And our sixth category are reporting tools. Now this is 2 minutes on the sets of tools that are there. We're going to spend a little bit more time next month looking at more specific data management tools, and we will feature some of this in the data management concept as well on this. But just get an idea that when everybody approaches you with one individual tool, it's probably incorrect. You're going to need a combination of things. And that's one of the things that we've tried to emphasize throughout this process as well on here. Oh, here we go. We got another polling question that popped up later on. Let's skip this one. We're almost at the top of the hour on this one. Let's just go to the guiding principles here. Again, what we'd like you guys to take away here is that managing data is a core asset. We look specifically at trying to then see what we can do to improve the quality of that asset. So we may want to try and identify gold records for particular elements. We might try to get to standardization to the degree that it makes sense. But all of this should be done out of a data governance exercise that allows us then to say, from a programmatic perspective, what does the organization, what will benefit the organization most? Where you can, where it makes sense, use industry and international data standards. The nice thing about standards is that there are so many of them, but the ones that you're using, if you say, we're using HL7, that is a standard that if you're in the hospital healthcare arena, you're going to be paying some attention to on that. Start to maintain your own sets of business rules so that you can start to figure out what your quality expectations should be. If you don't have the business rules written down, you have to react individually to them, whereas if you have the business rules not just written down but actually encoded into your systems, you can then look and see to the process of automating some aspects of data quality. You can go back and run data sets, particularly when somebody shares something with you from another organization. Again, they may ship a data set into you. You can run it against the same set of business rules and determine that your data is better than theirs or their data is better than yours. But, of course, if you don't have either of those pieces of information, it's going to be hard to use all the way around. We do need to be reaching out to the business owners, to the people who are our customers in the business, and talking to them specifically about the service level agreement. What is acceptable? For Federal Express, the number of packages that they deliver on a daily basis, 1%, is an awful lot of undelivered packages and an awful lot of intervention that has to go on in there. So something's going to be useful to you in your business context. Find out where the source of the problem is and apply your data quality measures to the source, not to the lake, but to the source. Because if we can do that, we can eliminate not just the cost of cleaning up the original one, but cleaning up any further ones that come on there as well. You may be using data brokers and, again, third-party aggregators and things like that. You can put a lot of pressure on them because if they're having problems with your pieces that you're selling to them, you're actually got a leverage piece where they can go into everything. And finally, you want to make sure that you're managing this process with a combination of stewards, business process owners, and people who are managing these service level agreements. So we're back to the top of the hour here, and again, want to leave you with this particular thought. It's not just tools. Unfortunately, in this space, too many people say, I'm going to buy a data quality tool and that's going to take care of it. That's not going to help you unless you also include the people, the education and the training that need to go along with it, and the processes, the data cleansing, the data prevention that you need to do in order to do this. And that takes us to the top of the hour. It's now 3 o'clock, and that is the map of everything that we've talked about here. As always for these, we leave you not just with the material here that's the reference material, but some really good references for books. I've already mentioned Danette, she's the third from the bottom, another really good book, Jack Olson's Data Quality Dimension book, and of course Tom Redmond's book on this as well. Mike Brackett's also got some good ones. Again, just this is a good book list to start with if you have not dived into this area in a large way. And with that, we move into the Q&A section, and so I will turn it back over to Megan and see what we have got. We have questions. Megan's on mute, so maybe we'll. There we go.
I don't know. Thank you, Peter. That was a great presentation. Now it's time for our Q&A. Time for you all to ask questions. So just click on the Q&A chat feature. You should be able to submit your questions through that window. And we've had one come in so far. So let's see any more come in. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. And the first question is a chief data officer appropriate?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I absolutely would like to see, well, let me ask that sort of rhetorically. In our organizations, we have chief officers who are the ultimate responsibility for and the ultimate source of knowledge about certain types of assets. For example, a hospital will have a chief medical officer. Most organizations will have a chief financial officer. They are the unquestioned source of authority and ultimate decision maker for matters falling within their purview. Right at the moment, most organizations do not have an ultimate authority on their organizational data assets. So the short answer to the question is yes, but even within how to leverage that, most people don't worry about the quality of money, but they do worry about the quality of financial instruments. So from a quality perspective, a chief data officer should have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, but my, at least in early experience with them, is that it's the rare individual that's had the right kind of background that's fully prepared to do this right away. So I'd say cautiously, yes, we'd like to get them into that category, but it may be a process that we have to grow these individuals over time as opposed to putting them in place and expecting them to work. And this is the same way as with data quality tools, too. When you get the tool, you're going to be able to turn it on and use it, just like you did with Microsoft Word when you first got Microsoft Word. But you're not going to know all the ins and outs of the tool and how to use all the various features and things with it. So you're going to have to practice it. You're going to have to get better over time. So just hiring somebody and buying a tool are necessary but insufficient conditions for success in terms of data quality engineering.
All right, great. And just so you all know, if you cannot see the Q&A section in the full screen mode, you can move your mouse to the top of the screen and click on the Q&A icon to make that section visible, just in case you couldn't see it. And let's move on to the second question. Who should the CDO report to, the CIO or the CEO?
It's going to depend. I would like to see, I mean, you'll notice many times in the presentation I've gone back and forth and hit on this concept that we have of translation. We call them business rules because we're in IT and they're in the business. So I'm seeing organizations that are achieving great success by moving their CDO under the business function. And not a whole lot of organizations, but the ones that have are actually getting some very good traction out there. I think that if it reports up through the CIO, you end up with a challenge of data quality being seen as a technical discipline. And hopefully you've gotten out of this talk here that the relying on this strictly as a technical discipline is absolutely impossible. It's a cooperative process. So the more we can make it seem not an IT function, I think the more success we will have with it.
All right. Let's see. The next question is there one thing to do more than any other for ensuring high data quality?
Awareness. If people are unaware of what fitness for use of your data is, then everything else has to flow from that. So you'll often see organizations where people are going, yeah, well, I've got lots of data quality, and it's causing me to work overtime, and it's causing my people to work overtime, it's causing us to turn out imperfect products, but they're grumbling at a low level. One of the reasons you hire consultants occasionally is because people like me can go into the executives' offices at the corners and say, guys, you've got a problem. And you'd be surprised, I thought IT was taking care of that. And there's this perception that because IT handles the data, IT actually fixes the data. And IT really has more of an attitude, again, I'm speaking very holistically here, but has more of an attitude that if you can gain access to the database, IT's job is done, and it's a business function to do this. So you end up with a big, big gap between the business expectations and the IT expectations. And that's really a very insidious problem in most organizations. So we trundle down to the main office, show them a half a dozen examples. I'll give you a quick story on this. I know there's some more questions coming, but working with one of the top TARP banks, so one of the top 20 banks in the country a couple of years back, and their business strategy was very simple. They had done some calculations and found out that their average customer had 2 of their 9 products. Now, that's a very nice piece of measurement, and they said if we can get our average customer to buy 2 more of our products, not just 2, but go to 4 products, then we can make ourselves more profitable. And they went to Wall Street and told them this is what their business plan was, and Wall Street was excited and said, oh, good, that's a wonderful thing to do. We'll bid your stock price up in anticipation of increased future earnings. So I had the unfortunate duty of working with the group there, and we took and ran some data quality analysis. We were doing some profiling. It was not with a profiling tool. We were doing it with some very smart SQL programmers. But we posed the question, how are you going to make customers aware of your products if you don't have at least a telephone number or an email address or a valid street address? If I have none of those 3, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to actually reach out to these customers and convince them that we can do more for them by selling them additional products and services. So we brought in one of the executives that was responsible for the business strategy, and we were explaining this to them and saying, look, you've got a lot of records out there in your customer database that have no ability for your very good staff to reach out and try to sell them these additional products and services. Now, I have to say we did a little bit of social engineering in the process of doing this. And we ran the query at the beginning of the meeting, and we set it up so that at the end of the meeting, the executive in charge said, would you run that query again for me? Again, I won't tell you how we kind of did that, but we manipulated the situation so that it was an appropriate question to be asked. And when we ran the query again, the executive came out of that meeting with the understanding of not only did they not have enough customers and services that had good information that they could ask questions about and sell these additional products and services to, but during the 1-hour meeting, we had added 16,000 records to this database that didn't meet that criteria. So the message was not only do we have a lot of data that is of poor quality, that means we can't achieve our business strategy, but that we are adding bad quality data records to our system at a rate of 16,000 an hour. And that was a very powerful message that was transmitted to the rest of the organization and resulted eventually in a call back to Wall Street that said, that thing we told you we were going to do, we can't do it this year. We're going to do something else this year, and we'll work on that next year. So again, you've got to have the ability to operationalize this. If you don't, it's just not practical whatsoever.
All right, great. And the next question is, how do you monitor data quality improvement and its effects to businesses?
Excellent. So Loretta Smith, who's one of my friends in DAMA and our VP of Communications, some of you may have seen her out on the stump, came in last night, and she has a little slide she likes to use. She was lecturing to my class, and she said it's got to do with baseline and base values. If we don't have a baseline, we can't show any improvement. So that's why we love to start off these exercises with the statement, all of your data in this organization is of unknown quality. Now that's a baseline. Next year, this time, we hope to have measured the baseline quality of certain aspects of the data. And let's just pretend, again, with these records, I'll continue on with this banking example, let's pretend that 30% of our customer base, we have no good contact information about them. Maybe next year the goal is to have only 25%, to have improved that by 5%. Again, you're trying to make the data fit for use in support of organizational strategy. If you don't have a link back to organizational strategy, it's questionable about what you're doing with it at all. So again, trying to find the baseline and then improving on that baseline. If you can't hold one part of the equation fixed, you have no ability to tell what's going on with the rest of your data. I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, please ask another one on that.
Okay, and then the next question is, do you recommend a separate team dedicated for data quality management, or would this be a responsibility that data stewards would take on?
I think that it's unlikely that most organizations are going to start out with a data quality team. Let me give you a little bit of an analogy, and this may apply to the CDO concept as well. First of all, as stewards, they should be educated in these concepts. If they are stewards of the data, then they are responsible for improving the quality of the data, or at least not making it worse. I would hope that the organization would actually want them to improve the data in there. So the stewards are going to need to know these concepts. Whether the stewards are in fact the ones who should be doing the work or not is going to vary from organization to organization. In larger organizations, stewards are going to have enough work to keep them busy, just with the policies and procedures things that are going on. On the other hand, you may not be able to afford a dedicated group. Again, the way these groups can grow is that when you show, let's go back to my example of $51,000 invested in an initiative and returning several million dollars in business value. The business could clearly see that if they continued that and had more work of that type to do, that by forming a dedicated group, the group should A, get better at what they're doing, and B, be able to achieve more leverage in terms of what they do as their knowledge of the organization increases. But just the same way, you may eventually work their way out of a job. Not to say that your data is all going to be of perfect quality at the end of 3 years, but in many organizations around the turn of the century, they had a concept called a chief electrification officer. Now, obviously, most organizations today would look really funny if they had somebody with a title Chief Electrifications Officer, but around the turn of the century when electricity was new and people were just getting exposed to it, it was perfectly appropriate and made good sense, and in fact was a very good business idea to have this type of knowledge, skills, and abilities in the organization. So I think that you may have organizations that form dedicated teams and eventually get to the point where their monitoring shows that the data is of sufficient quality that they can then spin that team down and put it into more automated and routinized processes. Again, it's going to depend from organization to organization, but I do think that the stewards have to have the knowledge, and I do think that you're probably going to be able to find some people who can do the rudimentary profiling and things that you need to do within the existing organizational context, but they've also got to have the time to do it. Again, if you're asking them to do this on the weekends and in their spare time and they've got lots of other things to do, they're not going to be able to do as good a job and they're not going to be able to get as good at the process. So having a dedicated team is something that's nice. Bigger organizations, I think, can justify it more easily than other organizations. But it is something that I think, at least for a period of time, many organizations will benefit from.
All right, and the next question is, could you give more insights on the CDMP and what courses need to be taken, and is the certification accepted in industry?
Yes, the certification is becoming accepted in industry. I think my slides are still being displayed here, so let me put that slide back up here. I'll tell you how far it has gone. I recently got a call from a recruiter that was recruiting for the U.S. federal government, a part of the federal government, and they wanted to have 20 people who had 20 years experience with the CDMP. And I said, well, that would be a really good trick because the designation's only been around since 2009, so I don't think anybody's got 20 years experience with it yet. But we are starting to see on monster.com and on our own dama.org website, where we have a job board out there, that we do have people who are saying CDMP preferred. Now, the exam is a series of core IT exam concepts and then some very specific knowledge areas. So you can take a core in, for example, IT concepts, and then a data warehousing piece, and then a data quality piece. You can kind of put your own certification together. Again, it gives you some core sets of skills that you are attesting to, and then some specialization areas. Eventually, with DAMA International, we'll probably take this in a direction of more specialization. By the way, your process of getting certified doesn't end with the certification. Just as data quality requires continuous monitoring and investment, we also require you to do continuing education there. So if you need more information on that, again, you can follow either one of those two links, and it'll take you to some more detailed information. But I hope that's helpful for you, and I encourage you to get your certification because we are starting to see it become popular. They want people with 20 years experience.
All right. Thanks, Peter, and thank you for everyone for participating in today's event. We hope you have enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dataversity and Shannon for hosting us. Once again, you will receive today's materials within the next 2 business days. Next month, we will focus on get the most out of your data tools, data management technology. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us for that as well. As always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Peter. This is another great webinar, and as Megan said, we'll get those slides and the recording out within 2 business days. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
Bye all.